Pete Lockett embodies a very specific kind of global, cohesive approach to music that has been one of the most pioneering forces for a while now. It's actually one of the topics we get into and try and dissect why more of us are not doing it, but I'll leave that to the conversation to elaborate upon. The point I'm trying to make here as an introduction to my guest today is that you're in for a treat because you get to listen to me pick one of the world's most cutting-edge, history-making percussionists currently active for a while now. As we say on Tapasya Loading, it's starting to become a thing now. The conversation speaks for itself, so I'm just going to get out of the way and let it do exactly that and move on with it. Before we move on though, a word from my sponsors. I did quote marks there. This podcast is brought to you by the holisticpianoacademy.com. That's my coaching and mentorship website. It's a new venture which is still in beta mode and one where I'm attempting to integrate my 20 plus years of experience as a professional musician and a coach/educator, and more recently, certified personal trainer and counselor. The idea is to offer a holistic form of education, 360-degree mentorship for artists of all ages and stages in their career, for not just music, but also self-care, well-being, workout routines, yoga, and of course, music lessons. Today's episode's also brought to you by everynowheremusic.com, which is my artist website. I have a new piano album out, my debut solo piano album, in fact, and I'm in the midst of the promo campaign for the same, and I'm just going to use this opportunity to kind of add to it. Check out everynowheremusic.com. I'm going to include a link directly to the album, which you can download on all streaming platforms and Bandcamp and direct from my website. Last but not the least, this episode's also brought to you by tlwrites.com, which is a very specialized freelance writing service I offer for artists and creative professionals. And now, moving on to an uninterrupted podcast. Hello, fellow beings. Welcome to Tapasya Loading, a safe space to attempt honest, raw, and authentic conversation in homage to the ancient act of stoking a sacred fire. I realized earlier on that I might have been slightly rude. I never actually asked you what to call you. I just went on a first name basis, but I never actually asked you if that was okay.
No, that's absolutely fine. And is TL good for you?
Absolutely.
Superb. Where are you based, TL?
I'm based between Germany and India. Before the COVID hit, I also had a couple of satellite bases in London and Lisbon.
Yeah.
Since the pandemic hit, I'm spending longer spells and living between Berlin and India.
Yeah. Well, that sounds exciting anyway.
Thank you. Appreciate that. How about you? Whereabouts, in which part of the world are you now?
No, I'm in London. Just in London.
Beautiful.
So, yeah, just no satellite bases.
Well, it's the kind of city where you don't really need any. It's an entire universe of its own, isn't it?
Very true. It's very true.
I was going through the email you sent me, which I find fantastically formulated, by the way. Thank you for the direction in which you pointed me towards.
Pleasure.
No, pleasure's all mine. It's an enormous honor to have you on, by the way. I've been a fan and an admirer of your work for a while now.
Well, thank you, and thanks for inviting me. It's going to be fun, catching up and
absolutely
talking all things music.
Yes, sure, that's the idea. Where would you suggest we start?
Well, we can start wherever you like, really. I mean, it was I liked some of your astute observations about the different areas that I've covered, and primarily how they're integrated into a hybrid vision.
Yeah, indeed.
So I think that's probably a fairly decent place to kick off.
Yeah, I'd say so too. That's one of the first things I had noticed when I heard you play for the first time or saw you perform was you brought together these musical worlds which have usually been somewhat oblivious to each other.
Yeah.
Especially from a rhythmic point of view. As I mentioned in my mail, the manner in which you kind of integrate the mathematical precision of South Indian rhythmic approaches with the lurchy claves of Afro-Cuban rhythms. I personally don't happen to know anyone who integrated so seamlessly in a manner that's so cohesive. Where did that journey start? And was this a vision you had in mind from the very beginning?
No, not really. I mean, it's really a matter of it wasn't. I didn't set out at the beginning and attempt to achieve that. I mean, it's just as I go through, my musical journey, when I come across things that move me emotionally and intellectually, then I'm compelled to look into them further to whatever degree that is. And so it's kind of made me a little bit of a musical magpie in a way, in that, there's lots and lots of different things that have, really caught my attention in depth over the years, and have been compelled to study them. And then as more and more things, as the vocabulary of all of those things, develops into a richer statement, then the natural thing is to then, see how they cross-fertilize with one another. So that's like a personal journey, in the sense of, seeing how things fit together.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one of the things that amazes me about the world of music in many ways is that there's not more, hybrid multicultural players and hybrid multicultural forms. It staggers me that it's not that common, and it just seems bizarre that there's not a lot more cross-fertilization musically, bearing in mind that musicians tend to be, some of the most musicians and artists tend to be some of the most open-minded and freely creative members of our species.
I agree on all counts. Is there a specific rhythmic approach or culture you would refer to as home, as your musical root?
No, I didn't get asked that in terms of instruments. What's your favourite percussion instrument? And, I always answer that question by saying that they're all my family. So it's like, if you got 3 kids, you wouldn't necessarily, although some people do, you wouldn't necessarily come out and say, oh, little Jenny is my favourite or something like that. They're all your children and it's your family. And I kind of think like that about percussion, and I also, percussion instruments. But I also think about that in terms of, like a rhythmic bass, in a sense, because everything's cross-fertilizing. It tends to be, a very hybrid, open-minded integration of different ideas. That said, my most in-depth study has definitely been, North and South Indian, in terms of an academic study, or study with masters, should we say, rather than academic.
Gotcha. Okay, I hadn't known that about you. That's extremely interesting. Not to be too random, I remember seeing something about your first gig being with a punk band. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's how it started. It was just a random thing. I was walking past a drum shop, and there was a sign in the window: drum lesson, £5. And that was it. I went in, and that was the beginning. And in the same way, and that it comes back to did you plan the integration of all these things? Did I plan the integration of all these things? The discovery of indie music was completely random as well, because it was a free concert that I happened to, but just walking past, really, and went in, and it was the late great Ali Akbar Khan, Sarod player, and the great tabla master Zakir Hussain, and it just at that point I was in punk bands in London, and it was like, wow, just completely blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, bear in mind that, and it's a thing that we'll come around to later, as technology and music and the exposure of world music from around the world everything from around the world, really, because of the internet and because of the accessibility of information and stuff. But bear in mind, so pretty much most people would know what Indian music is, and they'd know what Indian classical music is, or Bollywood music is, or they would at least have heard it and have some idea. But for me, at that point, in the 80s, there was no exposure at all to, that I'd seen of anything like that. So if you can imagine, you've never heard those instruments before, you've never heard that music before at all, and you go into a gig and it's, Zakir and Ali Akbar Khan. I mean, it's
wow, creme de la creme, straight to the top.
Yeah, understood. But of course, I didn't know that at the time. But it's just an unbelievable experience. It's just, it's like literally being, having 50 tasers fired at you at the same time or something. It's just such an extreme positive experience.
I can
imagine. And I think back to now. I kind of reflect. I think back on that, and I reflect to now how and it's good. Obviously, that we can discover music from all over the world at pretty much any point, and it's just right there on your phone or whatever you're walking around on the bus with, or on the tube or whatever. And I think, wow, it was something magical about that, about not having any idea of what that was, and then suddenly there it is. It was a very blessed moment, I think.
I can imagine. So that kind of an experience is something I think a lot of us might have had to discover something and receive that kind of positive energy. But you went on and converted that energy to transform your life into that of a virtuoso yourself. How did that happen? And what would you think was the catalyst behind that?
No, it's just doing what you're interested in. I think that's the thing. It wasn't ever. Of course, I moved to London. I was originally from Portsmouth. I moved to London to pursue a career as a musician. I mean, that's I'd obviously had ambitions to be, to try and make something of that particular endeavour. But in terms of actually starting to bring things on board, and it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, was that I come across things that I'm interested in, and for me the natural consequence of that is to study it, and but it's not a matter of, look, I'm going to study that in depth. It's like with the Indian North Indian exposure. First of all, I heard that music and I was like, wow, what is that? That's incredible. And then it was on the back burner. But then a month or so later, I lived in Tottenham at the time, and a newspaper fell through the front door, was delivered through the front door, free newspaper, and it had fallen open on the mat, and there was a big advert for tabla lessons.
Wow.
So I took that, as a calling. So I went along. I didn't think, it's a calling at the time. It's just a coincidence as far as I was concerned at the time. And then the doorway into that, it wasn't that I like it and therefore I'm going to become, spend a lot of time getting it together. It was really a matter of intrigue and interest and enjoyment that was the inspiration, and slowly. The idea in the beginning was that the rhythmic ideas were so different from anything that I'd heard before that I thought, actually, it will be a good way to get some new ideas into my drum set vocabulary. Mm-hmm. As it was, it took years and years to build that bridge. Literally, 10, 15 years to actually be able to decipher any of the Indian vocabulary on drum set for me. But that said, I just slowly got into the instrument. And when you go, a bit like going to the concert and having never seen it before, when I went into, the first tabla lesson with a great teacher, Yusuf Ali Khan, who actually coincidentally was Ali Akbar Khan's nephew, I believe. So when you go into that situation, and like everything is different, the way sitting down to play the drums, sitting cross-legged to play the drums. You play the Bayer with the left hand and the Dyna with the right hand, and the way the patterns are put together, the vocalization of it, the people, the everything, the environment, the social environment, the cultural aspect, because it was in an Asian centre that I was learning in Wood Green in North London.
Right.
And it's just everything is so completely compelling that you're pulled into that world. It's not like you stay on the outside of it. You're pulled into that world, and you can see how complex it is, what's happening with the drums and with the rhythms, the rhythm structures. Everything is so complex and involved and interesting that you're pulled towards it, or you're terrified of it. There's two things. I mean, I think one of the things about, and I noticed this a lot when I started to do, education myself, adult education tabla classes. Mm-hmm. It's quite funny because the first week of the class, you'll get about 40 people there, all sort of, happily saying that they're now learning the tabla. The second week, it's at least half. Right. Half have given up in 1 week. Right. And then week by week, you're losing 50% until a couple of months in, you've probably got 2 people coming. Not because of how you teach. It's pretty much a lot of adult education tabla classes seem to be like that with my friends and with everyone. It's just so complex that this commitment is so great to spend the time with it and penetrate it enough to be able to even start to perceive the vocabulary and the depth of it. It's a big undertaking.
Yeah, it's a lifetime calling in a way, isn't it?
Lifetime's not enough, I think, to be honest.
Very true, actually.
It's really not. You look at the masters and you look at, I mean, just superhuman stuff going on there. It's like,
yeah, indeed,
just incredible.
I'd like to hone in a little on what you said earlier on about taking 10 to 15 years to find a way to implement the vocabulary you'd learned through Indian rhythms to drum kit. I can't help but wonder, I mean, it is kind of new, isn't it? There aren't, I mean, just literally less than a handful in the entire world who probably do that, or actually doing an authentic job of using that language on the drum kit. Do you think it has something to do with the manner in which Indian rhythmic systems have tended to be more linear in nature as opposed to vertical?
Yeah, to a point. I don't think it's so much that. I mean, that's because there's a lot of linear concepts in certainly in contemporary Western drum set, for example, over the last 40, 50 years. And of course, in classical composition as well, there's a lot of linear approaches. I think more to the point, it's how music is structured, and I think you kind of, that's the thing to really penetrate. So, if you look at the kind of modus operandi, if you like, for North Indian classical duo, so say sitar and tabla, for example, the music is structured in a way over many centuries to be able to cater for the rhythm work that is an integral part of that that musical form. And so the way the music's structured means that, simply put, if you've got sitar and tabla or a percussion and a melody instrument, then when each of them solos, so we call it soloing, for the sake of this conversation, when each instrument solos, the other one keeps time. So if the sitar player is meandering and doing lots of different solo stuff away from the actual melody of the rag, then the tabla player will keep a basic time cycle. Right. And vice versa. When the tabla player is soloing, then the melody player will play the repetitive melody round and round, marking out the time cycle.
Right.
And so that idea of people taking turns to solo is completely different to how, say, for example, it would be in jazz, where if somebody is soloing, let's just say that there's a melody player soloing and a drum set player and other supporting instruments, of course, like bass and whatever. But let's just say the relationship between the saxophone soloist and the percussion player, the drum set player. Now, the drum set player can leap onto a lot more stuff and interact a lot more in the spur of the moment and follow some of the directions and routes that the melody soloist would be going on. And that doesn't happen in to a point. It does happen sometimes with more modern players, is that they'll have set things that they kind of follow, and obviously, the endings and all that, the big chakradars and conclusions and finishes, they'll play together. But and so just even that basic idea of when someone solos and how someone interacts with the soloist is completely different between those. That's just two simple examples, and so to start to integrate the approach of Indian rhythm into non-Indian music in itself presents a little bit of a conundrum, in that the music isn't designed for that to occur.
Right.
So if a jazz drummer is soloing, for example, then they might be soloing over the form. So they might be soloing over the form of the piece of music. Sometimes, a lot of jazz drummers say, "Oh, sing the melody in your head and solo over that."
Right.
And so it's a very different thing than having a complex rhythmic journey. Let's say someone's going to solo on the drum set for 32 bars. In the Indian system, it could be divided up in a whole number of different mathematical ways to end up on the downbeat or end up on the chosen note, chosen beat at the end of the cycle of time. And often during that period, it will be hard for someone who doesn't know the music. Sometimes it will be hard for them to identify where the time is actually, where the pulse is, because the rhythm goes so far away from it. And that's one of the intriguing things and exciting things about it. So working out where to use that material in non-Indian music, it's something that takes a lot of consideration and thought. It's not something you just suddenly sort of whip out on the gig, basically. Any
pointers on how to navigate those waters?
Well, I think it's about concepts. There's a lot of people who particularly, you kind of got, mainly I think you've got two sorts of Westerner that would study Indian music. You've got the musicologist who goes in depth and analyzes and notates and takes interviews, and which is great,
right.
Absolutely,
right.
Fantastic. Then you've got the people that go into the culture and try and become Indian, basically.
Yeah, the immersive approach.
Which is fine as well. So I'm not being critical of that, but they do everything to try and fit into the music in a way that a young student in India, Indian student, would try and fit into the music and learn it and all that. And so the other area are people that that there aren't so many of, are the people that kind of go into the music and then come out and do different things with it. People like Jonas Hallberg or Bernhard Schimpelsberger, the Austrian percussionist, is one of those people.
Yeah, he's a good friend. He was on the show as well.
Oh, great. Yeah, it's great free thinking.
Absolutely.
John McLaughlin. You could put. Trilok Gurtu is Indian, but you could put Trilok Gurtu in that zone of people that integrate and come out with something different. So I think they're the three main areas. But I think if you look at all of those people, that type of player, the third type of player. First of all, they all get into composition, which is certainly characteristic of them all. But most importantly, I think, is that they take concepts out. So it's not like they learn a raga and they learn some breaks or they learn some tihais or chakradars or whatever, and then just play that as a piece. It's fine to do that. A lot of people do it. But it's taking concepts, the basic concepts of modulation, subdivision, partitioning, time frames, calculations, mathematics, the idea of developing, a lap, jaw, jala, and gat in a tala, how you slowly bring the different octaves in the very beginning, and then you're adding time and pulse and then rhythm, and then the tabla would enter with the gat. So but if you take those concepts out, those pure concepts, they're the things that you can apply.
Right.
Rather than having verbatim material that you would just transplant onto what your environment was.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was actually, I've experienced something somewhat similar from the other way around. I'm of Indian ancestry and studied jazz piano, and I'm at a point where I try and find commonalities between how do I apply, the bulk of that knowledge into something that's not designed to have fit into that format. So one of the things I keep asking myself is how important is the ability to look beyond the cultural idiosyncrasies and focus in on the essence of each of these modalities and find the commonalities between all of them.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's the essence of it. I think getting to the a priori, the a priori of it all. And you kind of go back to, you kind of have to go back to the beginning. Really, you go back to, almost pre-agricultural revolution, and sort of think, how were people and how were they discovering music and creating and putting things together?
Very true.
And the systems that we have been constructed over centuries, and in a way kind of creates unnatural divisions in that before the cultural revolution, the agricultural revolution.
Well, the cultural revolution's not wrong either, technically, but I hear you.
Yeah. Before the agricultural revolution, where, people didn't stay in one place, and the concept of settling and saying, creating an area of land and saying, this is ours.
Yeah.
It wasn't part. It's not this idea of segregated lands is kind of an artificial. We just take it for granted now. We think, oh, that's what it is.
So true.
And it's. I think not wanting to get too much into that, but I think there's a similar thing with music. It's obviously things have developed in specific areas over huge amounts of time. And they all come from the same spring water, if you like.
Completely agree. That resonates deeply. I guess it also kind of explains why most musicians will have a very strong nomadic side to them, one way or the other.
Yeah, in a way. And, certainly, traveling the way that we do kind of leads to that. And we're lucky because we travel, we meet and perform with cultures and people from all over the world on a regular basis, which is, not the last couple of years, but before that, is a massive, massive privilege and an eye-opening and important aspect, I think, of being a musician. Like I say, I'm amazed that, and it's not a negative, but I'm amazed that there's not more cross-cultural collaborations in I'm not quite sure why that is. I mean, even if you look between North and South Indian, there's people play together, of course, but there's not that many. I mean, I don't know very many people who have studied North and South Indian music, for example.
Yes.
It's, there's a very, very few people.
I agree. I share your amazement.
Yeah.
It's it also kind of. I was actually about to refer to that in reference to what we just talked about a couple of minutes back. The honing in and the focusing on the essence. And I guess I'm rambling a little. My apologies. But what I'm wondering is, why aren't more people trying to focus in on that essence? What's holding us back?
I think it's categorization, really. I think people are used to, categories of I mean, categories would have happened naturally in the sense that, before worldwide travel was as easy as it is. I mean, you can even go back. I mean, my wife was born in India, and when she came over with her mother, they went back and forwards a couple of times. It was by boat. That's in the 70s.
Wow.
And so you think, actually, it's not that long ago that we couldn't really travel like we do. If we did, it would take a couple of months. It takes 3 months to get from, the south coast of England to New Zealand or something. Mm-hmm. Stopping at different places around the world, and so the obviously, the different parts of the world, the music would have been changing at a much, much slower rate than it does now. But if you look since recorded music effectively, and then the sale of recorded music, from Edison to right through to modern day digitalized music, the actual amount of it has just gone through the roof. There's so much stuff available. You're kind of overwhelmed by different music, and therefore everything kind of gets categorized. And I think people take that on board, along with education, generally speaking. But there's no place other than when we're educated as kids. There's no place in the natural world or amongst any species on the planet where subjects are categorized like they are in school. An hour of maths and an hour of geography and an hour of science and an hour of it. It's kind of not natural. And so our minds start to get forcing things into pigeonholes and into categories. And I think that's one of the contributing reasons why people kind of learn one thing and don't necessarily expand out and embrace lots of other different things as well. And of course, the other element is the tribal element of learning something of your people, of where you're from, your area, and or one's area, and that's part of your DNA, if you like, musical DNA. So I think there are lots of reasons, and not necessarily negative, but I can see why people would settle on just one style or one thing.
Indeed.
Yeah, it takes quite an explorer really to start to venture the dangerous and unpredictable waters where you come up with stuff and people don't necessarily always know how to respond to it because they've not seen that put together before in that way.
Yeah, the initiative of coming out of one's safety zone, it's can be quite a bit to handle.
Absolutely, yeah.
Completely. Also, just FYI for our listeners, when I ask why aren't more people focusing in, and it's not a space of judgment that comes from, it's observation, and I'm genuinely curious. Just to clarify to our listeners, no judgment here whatsoever, and
I mean, for me, it's not a matter of judgment, it's a matter of slight sadness, I would say, because it would be. I mean, it's the same, to be honest, with everything, with people.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
The idea of cross-fertilizing and sharing, and it's vitally important to the future.
I completely agree. I'd like to think I'm of the same camp. I guess the complexities involving that entire process is, at least I only speak for myself when I say this, turn out to be a little more than I'd imagined at a different phase of my life. But, I'm only speaking for myself there. Speaking of different musicians to engage with and play with, I'm actually on your website and going through the list of collaborators you've had throughout your career. It is mind-boggling. It's not just the names themselves, but also the diversity and the sheer, for lack of a better term, quality of the collaborators. My God, from Björk, Peter Gabriel to A.R. Rahman and Zakir Hussain to, my listeners should just go check out this page. It is literally one of the most mind-boggling lists of collaborators I've seen.
It is a list. I would say that a lot of that is sessions as well. It's not necessarily all collaborations, but it's it's an honour to work with some of these people that I've worked with. I've been very lucky, very blessed to have been. And I think that, a lot of it comes from, having the open mind and having. I noticed that as soon as I started releasing CDs and was putting projects out there that were visible and touring and doing gigs with my own projects, I would get a lot more people. First of all, I'd get a lot more people calling to because they'd heard something and they wanted something like that on their record or their film or whatever. But the other thing that it opened the door with was having more of a free, open, creative hand with whatever I did on sessions or films and stuff like that. So, it's just a great path to have trodden. I feel very lucky to have been involved in some of those projects.
You're very modest, and it just speaks for the enormous stature of musicianship you embody. But I'm curious though, what would, if you could. And I know this is an unfair question, really, but if you could boil it down to one distinguishing factor which made you the one person, such an enormously diverse list of artists, giant artists, chose you to be part of their project, what would it be?
I don't know. You have to say open mind, really, as well, and the idea of coming up with something different, of not just churning out what's expected of me. I've always felt, very a great responsibility to come up with something interesting on whatever project I've been involved in, recording or live. And so, that responsibility and that attention to detail and, I suppose conceptualization of sound, thinking of the, different timbres and different, tonalities and the way things fit together, the way instruments fit together to make interlocking parts. But essentially, I'd say, responsibility and being responsible and an open mind.
Right. That's a very interesting balance, actually. Responsibility is often associated with boring, and I know I'm putting myself out on a ledge here, but that combination with that open-mindedness, so I guess, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So that balance between discipline and freedom.
Yeah, to a point. But by responsibility, I mean that, it's my responsibility to come up with something interesting.
Gotcha.
And so, the route to that responsibility is not just on the session, and it's not just in the studio or on that gig. It's that whole, it's, the years and years before that have led to that moment, whichever that moment is. And it's the, keeping keeping an open mind to stuff. I mean, I remember doing I did Vandi Matram with A.R. Rahman, and we had like a week in the studio somewhere in South London. And at the end, on the last day, I'd had my tabla there the whole time. You know, I hadn't done tabla on the session. I'd just done everything else, taiko and this and that, whatever. And then he said, "Oh, I would like, let's do a bit of tabla on this track." So I started playing tabla on the track. You know, he comes over the cans. It's like, "Oh, it sounds too Indian."
Really?
Like, so okay. So I start doing
the irony.
I know. As I start doing something else, slightly different pattern, and he goes, "Oh no, it's still too Indian." And so in the end, I turned the drums around the other way, so the high one was on my, I swapped the buyer and the diner around, and was playing them like bongos. And he's going, "That's exactly it. That's exactly what I want." And so I think the thing about it is that you can't pre-conceptualize what people want on something. You've got to go in with a fairly open mind and not be too bogged down by, the specific, rules and regulations of a tradition that or whatever. You've got to go in, and you're kind of like their sound module, really. That's the way I think about it with sessions. And so your responsibility and your creative palette is, giving them the opportunity to, discover something about that aspect of their music that they didn't know was there before.
Yeah, that's very inspiring. That's a very inspiring point of view, actually. I want to respect your time. I know we want to keep this as crisp as possible, and this is really amazing input. I'd be super curious on the development of your app, which I find is somewhat kind of, even though indirectly related to what you just said.
Yeah, very true.
Because it's one of the most diverse, one of the most flexible apps out there.
Yeah, Drum Jam, the app's cool. It's been out for a few years, and the idea that I had, there's a few angles to it actually. The first, one of the things that was apparent to me on, people's perception of percussion was that they wouldn't always necessarily know what instruments sounded like exactly. They wouldn't be like, if you were interested in the tabla, and you might know roughly the sound of the tabla, or someone might know roughly the sound of the tabla, but you can't explore with it because it takes probably a year to even get the basic tones happening on the instrument. Right. So I had the idea that I wanted to have something that would be something where people could explore the tones of an instrument,
right,
without having to study it. Just as almost like as a learning thing in a way.
That's really interesting. I hadn't realized that the seed of the idea had its roots in education.
Yeah, it was one of the seeds. There was a few different angles to it. This was one of them, and so that's why I had the idea of the dragging finger on the solo pads and stuff like that, so people could explore the instrument. And it's also why there's a big, within the app, if you go in there, you can see there's a big educational pack inside the app about all the instruments, the history and pictures and how you play them and all that sort of stuff. Oh. If you go into the documents in the app, that's all in there. So, and then the other idea was which I suppose is educational and practical in a way, of how to be able to show people the possibilities of combining different percussion palettes. So the first idea that I had with that was, I don't know if you've heard of an app called Urban Spoon.
I haven't, no.
It's a pretty old app that's been around. I think it's probably still around. I don't know. But basically, it's like a little fruit machine, and it picks up your location, and you shake it up, and it comes up with 3 restaurants near you.
Oh, nice.
So it's a pretty cool idea. And then you shake it again, you get another 3. You can kind of select which ones you want.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that idea. Maybe it could be like a shaker and a bongo and a cowbell or something, whatever, and then shake it up, and then you'll get a, I don't know, a tabla and a something else, different combination of instruments.
Beautiful.
And then flick over to another page, and then you can solo on top of it with another chosen instrument of your choice. So that's how it came about. That was the original idea, and then it enveloped. Luckily, I got one of the app geniuses of the early music app development with Jesse Chappell,
mm-hmm.
and then we just started piecing it together, and so just for the listeners, it's you can drag. It's all acoustic audio, so it's not MIDI at all. So you can drag loops in to a window that's XY axis, which is volume and pan. And then you can do different filters and different stuff on those, drag loads and loads of different loops in that all play together at pretty much any tempo, or 60 to 200 anyway. And then you go over to the solo patch and you can solo on top either by dragging or tapping or whatever, But it's done really well, and if anything, I think it's for me, existentially, it kind of gets across the idea of no barriers, because I don't divide it up into Indian percussion and African percussion,
exactly.
and Cuban percussion and Arabic percussion, although all those instruments are still there.
Exactly.
It means you can drag anything in and it will work with anything else,
Indeed. Who would have thought it would have taken an app to explore these commonalities?
Yeah.
And if I may plug in a user review as well, I've used this app. It is not funny how good it sounds and how realistic it sounds. It's spooky almost.
But that's what I wanted to achieve with it. That's why it's very important to have it as acoustic audio.
May I request you to take us through the recording process of it? Did you just take a day off to do a studio session?
Simple, really the least complicated. And I find that with percussion generally, it's not always the same. If you go and you go into Air Studios or something, then
mm-hmm.
They might want to record the room and they might want surround sound and they might want this.
Mm-hmm. For
something for an app like this, is you want to have as little interference. So really one mic mono, and so then you place everything in the stereo spectrum. As soon as you start to record it all in stereo with different things, it's just too much, there's too much natural stereo mix on everything. So, and I prefer that actually with putting a lot of percussion down. If you're putting loads and loads of different percussion parts, I think the simple approach to it, for me personally, everyone's going to have a different approach, and, different contexts also sometimes require a different approach, but generally speaking, I try and keep it simple. Mono for a lot of the individual drums, mono mic, so you can then work with it afterwards. Obviously, if you've got other drums, they might need to be stereo. If there's more than one drum, for example, you can't pop that in.
I'm
mono.
so happy you say that, because I'm absolutely in agreement with you. In fact, it's one of the first things music producers learn, at least the good ones, that your mix needs to sound legit in mono first. That's because even the human ears, even though we take it in through stereo, we still kind of streamlining it into a mono signal in our heads.
Yeah. The other thing is, with the app, because the actual XY axis is stereo.
Right.
Means you can place instruments in the different place in the stereo mix. So the instruments are initially mono, but then of course they're placed in a stereo field.
Exactly. Right. So it's like a percussion ensemble coming at you.
Exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds amazing. For my listeners, if you haven't checked this app out yet, I have no vested interests in this, and this is no advertisement, but you really need to go check this app out. It's a game changer. I don't think there's any other app out there which does anything similar.
There's not, actually. There's not. It's weird because it's been out now for 6 or 7 years, I think, if not more. and it still does really well. You know, on the last update, it was top 5 in about 40 countries for a week. So I mean, it does do pretty well.
I'm very happy for you.
Music apps, that was, not apps overall, of course.
That's really good to hear. It definitely deserves that kind of recognition. Any chance or any ambitions of going for a multi-track version of the same in the future? Is that a possibility?
Well, no, we're releasing an AU version of it.
Beautiful.
Probably in the next month or so, I think.
For real?
So it'll be audio unit. So that kind of makes it multi-track, because you could just put loads of versions of Drum Jam in what you can anyway, in Cubasis or whatever, GarageBand and stuff like that. So yeah,
that's amazing. So my listeners, definitely worth checking out. We're coming towards the end. As mentioned, I do want to respect your time.
Well, are there any other questions that you have?
Well, I love what you mentioned about global music today, and how instead of looking at global music and its role in our current world, it's more about how it's turned into entertainment and commodity rather than being a vital cultural asset to the community.
Yeah, I think it's a really important aspect for me. It's an important aspect of music. This idea of art has become a saleable commodity more than it's become a resource for a community. I mean, if you think about music in particular, music we're swamped by music. It's it's just everywhere where you don't want it to be. It's in the supermarket. Some of the clothes shops down near where they're more like a disco than they are a clothes shop. You literally can't go in there.
Mm.
The phone, you get through to someone on the phone, and then you got some distorted nuisance in your ear for 10 minutes while you're waiting to get through.
Mm.
And for me, I think it's important to get back to where we came from. First of all, with music, when music was part of our everyday lives in a community, and I learned a massive amount when I went to Rajasthan. I did a project in Rajasthan, deep in the deserts of Rajasthan. I went out to Jaipur, and then we went out into the deserts with the promoter of this, who was putting this project together. And then we went to all these little villages, like literally in the middle of the desert, with no running water, just incredible, amazing experience. And then each little village would put on a performance, under the banyan tree or, somewhere in the village.
Wow.
And it was just an incredible experience. And it made me see something for the first time. And that was that, music was part of their everyday life. It wasn't something that they were trying to achieve something at, or become famous at, or, have any other ulterior motive to what they were doing. Music was just part of their, they had a community, and the consequence of the community was the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of thinking, what would it have been like, to have, had music like that in when I was growing up? And I suppose arguably you could say things like a punk rock movement are part of a culture, if you like, but it's a very quick, doesn't exist for a very long time, and then there's something else, and then there's something else, and something else.
Mm-hmm.
So just this idea that music was part of everyday life, and not something that is a saleable commodity, and also how people would have perceived music. And if you go back before Edison and before recorded music, what music would have meant when you saw it. The musicians would have been, the only time you'd have heard music and seen music would be, live in the village or in the cathedral or wherever. And it would be like these people were sorcerers and magicians and
healers,
alchemists of sound.
Yeah.
It would be something that would be completely mind-blowing, and then you'd see people doing it, and then you wouldn't hear it again. You wouldn't go home and listen to music. You'd listen to music in those environments. And I think music would have been perceived in a completely different way than it is now, because we're, like as I said earlier, we're swamped with so many different things, and we're swamped with music wherever we are, that it kind of dulls. I mean, maybe not us, the musicians, the people who have been so involved with music and sound, but certainly in terms of the perception of music by the masses of society, I don't think they see it with the reverence that and it's not like saying, oh, we need to be, worshipped as musicians or anything, but music is something that needs to be revered and respected, and I don't think society sees it now as a particularly valuable thing to their daily lives. So it was an interesting thing, particularly the being in Rajasthan and seeing that it was so much part of their daily lives. And I'd not experienced that before, because all of the music that I experienced, in India as well, was, as much about achievement as it was about, achievement and being in a senior position in society, as it was about the music itself. That goes for, jazz musicians or, whatever. That was my feeling from that. Of course, there's obviously exceptions.
I know exactly what you mean. I realize, at the risk of formulating a somewhat blanket question, if may I ask you what you personally believe the highest purpose of music is, apart from the communal aspect?
Well, you have to look at I think in a way, you would look at the exploration of sound, or the exploration of objects in a creative sense. Mm-hmm. It's what's driven us to to developing as a species. And if you look at how sound is used, and sound is used in the animal kingdom, for example, you get birds, in the jungle, birds that live towards the top of the trees sing at a much higher pitch than the birds that live nearer the floor of the jungle. Wow. Because they've learned about the reverb and how the sounds will carry. So if the bird nearer the floor of the jungles has birdsong of a high pitch, it will just reverberate too much and won't go to its destination, whereas low pitch cuts through more. Amazing. And so, I think sound as a, I don't necessarily differentiate, sound from music. It's just developed in a different articulation. You could equally say that, language, we're communicating through words, which is sound. They reverberate in our head. It's vital to our development as a species. And now we're kind of overtaken a little bit by the intellect. Right. And we've kind of lost some of those basic, lost some of the
higher intelligence, the more intuitive side.
I think we've just lost our connection a little bit with some of the primal things, such as sound. Right. I mean, you look at the marvel of how languages develop, and in Chinese, for example, and some African languages where pitch is used in immense detail in the language. Yeah. But I think it's all about communication.
Very true.
There's one place in Turkey where I think there's just one place left, and I'm not sure where it is, but it's in the middle of, pretty much the middle of nowhere in these valleys. And the way that that people communicate is by whistling. Mm-hmm. These different, a bit like birdsong, really.
Amazing.
And it's interesting. I mean, it would be interesting to go back to the beginning of the human species and have a time lapse of the development of music.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think it might have been a meme or something, embarrassingly enough. But I remember reading something like, music is what, or emotions words can't express. Mm. I don't know if that's too too far a stretch from what you just were referring to.
I think one of the things as well is that, it's not something, it's not something you can put into words.
Exactly.
Because of the way you're experiencing it.
Exactly.
And it's almost alien in some ways. It's kind of abstracted. Having it recorded is an abstract of the actual experience of the music making process.
So true.
In many aspects.
It was an absolute honor and pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for doing this.
Great. Thanks for your great questions as well. It's been a lot of fun.
No. It's I'd be a fool not to have asked these questions. It's just an absolute privilege to get the chance to pick your brain the way I just did and the way you just let me. So thank you so much.
Fantastic.
How's the best way to support your work, Pete?
Yeah, I don't know. Whatever you fancy, really. Just follow and yeah. All just spread the word. There you go. That's the important thing.
That's the whole idea. That's what we're trying to do here. FYI, all links to your online presences will be included in the episode notes. So for my listeners, please make sure you go and check those out. And thanks again. This was a massive honor and an enormous pleasure.
Fantastic. Thank you, my friend. And we'll stay in touch.
Absolutely. Gratitude from the bottom of my heart for listening till the very end. Please consider taking a minute to subscribe to our show so you know when the next episode is out. This is a labor of love, one I hope snowballs into one that's sustainable in its attempt to support independent thought and authentic relating. And having you as a regular member of our audience is what makes that a realistic prospect. Much love and talk soon. Just another voice out there.